Welcome to another episode of the Scottish Property Podcast. My name's Nick Podty. I'm here with Stephen Clark. How you doing?
Hello, good, thanks, you.
Just back from your booster?
Oh, God, I had to do it. I hated myself for doing it, but they forced me into it. I'm wanting to go on holiday in a few weeks' time and I'm not classed as fully vaccinated.
Nice one. Well, let's launch into today's show. So we had a great guest there, Kenneth Martin, who's actually an architect. That's his profession, but he's also a developer, new build builder, and also runs some property training on property development as well. But I think it was funny because the first 10 minutes of the conversation, you guys were going back and forth, and you actually put me right off any new build development with all the challenges and problems. But I mean, that's good because we want to tell the real story here on the Scottish Property Podcast team.
Yeah, absolutely. And new build development's like any other property strategy, isn't it? You have to go and learn. You have to understand. You have to build up the knowledge, either pay for it or go and learn it. But learn it from professionals like Kenneth, because he's got a full wealth of knowledge, and he's not only just, getting paid as a fee to do this workload. He's actually a developer, so he sees it from the full side, and he's built 60 houses in the last 5 or 6 years as well. So he's got a fair bit of experience doing his own developments.
Yeah, and we know that I got wrapped up in the whole thing. Once you start getting involved in property and all that, and you see people doing bigger scale developments and that, you automatically want to do a bit of that yourself. But after looking into it a bit more, I'm just like, what the heck? I don't want to get involved. It sounds like too much of a headache. And with Kenneth, we talk about the 5 kind of steps, the 5 pillars through the whole process, from planning to dealing with contractors and all the rest of it. There's so much that can go wrong, and it's not an easy life at all. So, it's one of those ones where we talk about it at the end, actually, about getting residual income and that kind of passive income that you get in buy to let, albeit we're smaller numbers. But maybe you want to have a think about the stress and pressure and the time that basically goes into some of these property development stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it depends absolutely on your strategy and what you want out of property. If you want the Lamborghinis and the big houses, the holiday homes, then you have to do new build developments because there's chunky profits to be made. But if you want to do, have less or have choices and have more freedom and have a residual income, then you're going to do something a bit lower entry, like a buy to let, which is not going to bring in the masses of money, but it's going to give you a nice lifestyle that's going to allow you choices to do what you want.
Brilliant. So we'll just cut straight to the interview with Kenneth Martin. So I'm delighted to welcome to the Scottish Property Podcast, Kenneth Martin. How are you doing today, Kenneth?
I'm very well, thanks, guys. Yep, can't complain.
Good stuff. So we are going to have a conversation today around property development. Now, we get a lot of our listeners reaching out to us saying, how do we get started? Like, how does this whole property development stuff work? So we're going to kind of aim the conversation around 5 key pillars that Kenneth's actually done a video on his YouTube channel about, basically getting started in property development. So we'll get on to all that good educational stuff later on. But first, Kenneth, I just want to take you back how it all started for you in property and just give us a wee brief introduction to your background, please.
Sure, no problem at all. Thanks for that, guys. Yeah, so my name is Kenneth Martin. I am an architect. I qualified back in 2001. I actually sat my part 3 the day the Twin Towers came down, so everybody will remember what we were doing that day. And since then, I've really helped a lot of kind of small to medium-sized developers through the architecture practice and getting started or pushing forward with their careers in terms of property development. Probably about 6 or 7 years ago, I started to get a wee bit frustrated with helping these developers and seeing them run off into the limelight with a Range Rover. And I thought, well, I wanted to start doing it for myself. So I got involved in several developments about 6 years ago. Most of them are kind of coming to fruition, and got some experience in doing development myself. So I always say, if you're going to go and if you're going to go and take exercise from a PT, you don't want to take exercise from a fat PT, So if you want to take advice from an architect, then you probably want to find an architect who's actually done a few developments, because it's dead easy to sit and theorise and do drawings and this is what you should do or what have you. But once you've actually built a few of these things for yourself and put your own money and purse on the line, it becomes a different educational experience. So a wide range of kind of construction industry background, from everything from like small extensions all the way through new build houses, commercial properties, pubs, clubs, master planning. Quite a vast array of experience since well, over 20 years actually since I've done it. Lock Architects was set up in 2004 as well. So, it's pretty in-depth knowledge that myself and the team now have.
Can you give us a wee flavour of like any kind of projects, just so that we know what you're up to and active on now? Just kind of touch on anything.
Yeah, well, several new build one-off houses for clients who are looking at self-build. We've got that. We've got a development down in Greenock for 19 new build houses for a developer down there. We've got a 7-unit site up in Falthouse for myself. That's on site just now, and we dealt with all the architecture processes for that. Commercial wise, we've got a development in East Kilbride for 4 retail units. That's going through, it's just been approved through planning there, so we'll probably start on the build warrant side of that soon. And just got a commissioning this morning actually for a rather large extension to a distillery up in East Kilbride as well. So there's a kind of broad mix of, all relatively small size stuff though. We don't tend to deal with, the kind of the big, huge architectural commissions. So probably anything up to about £2-3 million, we can sit quite comfortably and deal with that.
What are you finding the biggest challenge right now, Kenneth, for getting these developments off the ground or through planning?
Well, you've just hit the nail on the head. There's two primary challenges that we're dealing with just now as architects. The big one is getting through the planning and the building control processes. Not because anything's significantly changed, other than the fact that the councils are particularly under-resourced. Yeah. So a lot of them have been and still do work from home. Some of them are now coming back into the office on a kind of part-time basis. But the numbers of staff that they've got are incredibly poor relative to the workload that we've just all enforced on them. Because if you remember back to the first lockdown, I took a fortnight off. I thought it was, this is a holiday, sitting playing, not Atari, what do you call it? These modern computer games with my daughter, which I hate, but, of course she was beating me. But all these things, you get a fortnight to actually think, oh, well, okay, nobody knows what's happening in this world. Nobody knows if we're back to work in 2 weeks, a month, 6 weeks. So I just treated it like a holiday. But very, very quickly, the phone started to ring. We had clients who are pretty high net worth individuals who are sitting there saying, right, well, if we can't actually build anything, if we can't do anything, we're going to chuck stuff through planning and building control again. And all of a sudden, the practice became particularly busy. So that happened across the board with a lot of, construction, development, etc. And all of a sudden, planning departments and building control departments were absolutely swamped. So the big challenge for us really just now is trying to work our way through these types of processes. Not because there's anything that's come in that's more onerous. It's just resourcing. The second thing I would say is really Scottish Water. So there's a lot of people out there just now, even in a one-off self-built house, they'll go and they'll buy the plot or they'll do some due diligence on the plot. But Scottish Water, several years ago, and it's becoming much more prevalent, brought in a rule that you cannot connect your surface water into a combined sewer.
Because the Scottish Government wasn't going to pay for Scottish Water to treat the surface water, but they were treating the fill, was that right?
I don't know the ins and outs of who's paying what or wasn't paying what, but Scottish Water are obliged to take in your fill water, right? So, but if you've got, let's say some of these older housing estates, etc., where you've got a combined sewer under the road, right? You can take your fill water into that. They're obliged to take that. But as long as there's capacity at the end, sewerage plant, sewage treatment works. But surface water is a completely different thing, because what was happening is, in the event of floods, surface waters get into the combined sewers, they're overflowing, and you've got poo and all that kind of stuff, get into rivers, and then SEPA get involved, slap Scottish Water about the head and say you're polluting the rivers, and all of a sudden there's a bin fight. So Scottish Water pretty much just clamped down on that and said you can't put in your surface water into these combined sewers. So we've got numerous clients just now who are really struggling to find ways of getting rid of surface water from sites.
The reason I kind of know a wee bit about what you're talking about, there's I learned that the hard way I've only put one site through planning for a new build development that I'm involved in, and it was the same kind of thing. And I've done a bit of due diligence and background check on it. Apparently, it was about 2008. The Scottish Government had a fallout with the Scottish Water saying, well, you're paying us for getting rid of our combined sewer and our foul, but you're not paying us to get rid of the surface water. And so Scottish Water turned around and said, well, we're not taking your surface water. But obviously, at the time of recession, they couldn't really quite enforce it because it would have kind of curbed any kind of development. So apparently they only started reinforcing it back in 2015. But I mean, starting off as a developer, you didn't know any of this stuff. And when we went to do these 3 houses, you had to go and get I think we had to use something called, I think the company was called Groundwork Dynamics. Basically, it was drilling the holes down about 36 metres with coiled tubes with holes through it and putting stones in it. And basically, it was an extra 24 grand that you hadn't accounted for in the development just to get the surface water, which was obviously quite a costly factor in that you wouldn't have picked up on.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely, and that's the company who we're working with for several sites actually, and the company that we tend to bring in if there's issues. But that's it. You know, it's how do you deal with all this surface water. So for those that are listening and don't understand what that is, it's probably it's the water off your roofs and the water off all your hard surfaces and driveways that ordinarily would maybe seep through into the ground. That needs to go somewhere. So yeah, it's a huge problem right now. It's a huge problem.
So if you were doing the due diligence on a site like that and you were looking for somewhere to get rid of your surface water, would you be looking to a burn or a soakaway or something that was nearby? Or is that your kind of common route to try and go down, or the cheapest route to go down, I'm assuming?
Yeah, the first route is, you typically know when you go out to see a site in terms of the age of the site by looking, for example, for manholes in the road. You know, if you've got 2 manholes paired next to each other, then chances are that's a 2-pipe system, one for foul, one for surface. And you think, well, in theory, as long as capacities and what have you are fine, I've got a connection, I've got somewhere to put it. If you're struggling with that, the next thing you would do is, right, is there a wee burn or a water course or something nearby where I can get to? So, yeah, there is, for example, there's one over there. Right, okay, but whose land are you going to cross to get to it? Have you got a right of way? Have you got to negotiate a right of way? These are things that we'll look into as well. And then if that's not fruitful, the third thing you can do is look at a soakaway. So that's where basically you're putting in filter trenches within the ground to hopefully allow all of the water to seep through into the natural water course. Now that comes with problems as well, because most intermediate novice developers think when as soon as they've got a site, they want to put the biggest house on that site because that's how we're going to get the biggest return. It doesn't always work like that. But if they fill the site with house, even though the planners might be happy that the house, okay, it's maybe too big, but we can live with it, you need certain sizes and set-off criteria for these soakaways. So they need to be 5 metres from a boundary and 5 metres from the footprint of any building. So that's you need back gardens then that are potentially 12 or so metres long or wide minimum to allow to get these things in. And too many people tend not to have that type of space left lying.
So that might kind of curb developers' kind of ambitions for, on this site we can get X amount of houses, but then when they look at something like that, you go, no, you can't, because you need that needs to act as garden space, not another housing plot, basically.
That's it. It's the big realisation now as architects as well, when we're planning things out, is how do you deal with all this stuff? Whether it's a one house development or multiple house development, you need to leave adequate space for these types of scenarios.
Do you think this curbs like the smaller developer then, like the opportunities for smaller developers off like houses, maybe, I don't know, like up to 5, 6 houses where maybe it's not quite kind of financially viable to do sites like this now, but it's maybe the bigger ones can put in the infrastructure for it?
Yeah, the bigger developers can obviously put in the infrastructure because, the bigger guys are getting hit with this as well, though. So they're obviously getting hit with Scottish Water. We're saying, yeah, we know about planning and everything else that goes with it, but you need to keep your Scottish Water connection. So these guys are pulling services, gas, electric, some of you, sometimes from quite far away to get into a site to service it. But the other thing is, I guess, land costs just now. We're at this. I mean, everything's cyclical, yeah, as we know in property. So we're at that stage in the cycle whereby you've got the landowner who doesn't really know what they're doing. They're taking advice from a estate agent. Estate agents are still working, some of them to the old rule of a third. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden, a £300,000 house, right, or end value house, the land's worth £100,000. You cannot build a house and etc. and pay £100,000 for the plot. You can't do it. You know what I mean? Yeah. But you've got,
and I'm assuming you can't build the thing for £100,000 because of material costs and labour costs going through the roof.
No, that's it. And you've got, if you're going for banks funding, lending, as a developer, you want to have roughly 25% profit in it, so you can get your funding and have some buns there. Should something go wrong, at least the bank's getting their money back. And when you factor all these figures in, the land values are just too high. But we're at that stage in the cycle whereby the landowners are hearing, well, property prices are going up, so I'm not budging on my land cost, etc., etc. And I think we're getting back to that stage whereby until a correction happens, there'll be a lot of plots and what have you sitting there, and then they'll start to come back at the start of the new cycle.
So well done, guys. In the last 10 minutes there, you've just put me right off new build development. So congratulations. Listen, we all realise that there's a lot of issues out there. I think obviously the pandemic's not helped things. And we spoke to a guest just last week there who's a house builder up in Dundee, Eddie, and he was talking about the issues that they're facing as well, skills shortages, materials, government red tape, all the rest of it, planning problems. But let's just, we'll go off on a wee positive note now and give the listeners a wee bit of education, that they might be thinking, this is a route I really want to go down. Obviously, we know that it can be quite lucrative as well if it's done correctly, and there can be ups and downs along the way.
But I'm noting here, Nick, that you're the optimist and I'm the pessimist for the first time in 2.5 years doing this podcast.
Mate, you started off with a real downer there. I need to pull this back here because we've lost half the listeners already. This is supposed to be property is supposed to bring you riches. It's supposed to make you wealthy. Come on.
Cheers, mate. Appreciate that.
Right, so Kenneth, you've done a really good video on your YouTube channel about, it's an architect's guide to property development. And the great thing about you is you're an architect, you're a developer, you're out there, you're doing it, you're seeing exactly, what's going on in this field. So I've brought up this video here, and obviously you talk about these 5 pillars. So I can get, if you've forgotten about it, by the way, I can guide you through it and then jog your memory. But first of all, you've said, so what is development? So we've got buy to flip, house alterations, planning uplift, new build housing, multiple residential, commercial, industrial, office. So we've got all these things that kind of come under this umbrella. But then, we go on to say, what are these 5 pillars of creating a successful development? So pillar number 1, your power team. So do you want to kick us off there, Kenneth, and just take us through these 5 steps?
Yeah, so pillar number 1 is the power team. So that's one of the fundamental things I think you've got to get right when you're starting off in the development. And I also think that architects, engineers, QSs, various different professional consultants, they will tend to specialise in maybe 1 or 2 of those different development types. You don't typically get, for example, architects who would specialise in all of them. So it's very important that when you're starting off in your journey, that you're taking advice and doing proper homework and getting really stuck into the appointment of the appropriate and professionals right at the start. So I've got clients who'll use me for specific types of developments, but not use me for other things, and that's absolutely fine. Yeah, that's just the way it is. And that's one of the fundamental things that I like to try and teach people when they come in. Now, your architect is typically someone who has access to a full power team, or power team is the word that comes from the stage, from the trainers. We as architects actually just call them your design team. Yeah, they're just your design team. Now that could embody accountants and what have you, but your design team would typically be your architect, your structural engineer, your quantity surveyor, maybe a civils engineer to deal with all the Scottish water stuff and drainage issues that we're talking about just now. So there's some key fundamental people you've got to put in place. I would suggest that if you're embarking on this for the first time, unless you've got any kind of strong compulsion to use an engineer or someone you've worked with in the past, I would suggest that you do your homework, you find your architect, and then your architect can guide you towards the professionals that they use on a daily basis, because they've worked with some of these professionals for decades, sometimes have working relationships with them and can bring them to the table. That hopefully that will give you strength with your power team, as we call it.
Great stuff. And moving on to planning permission, we obviously touched on the planning permission earlier, and we know that there's issues with delays and things like that, but do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, so Pillar 2 is planning permission. So again, that's one of the fundamental things that we like to talk about or teach about in development. In England, there's what's it called, prior notification. There's the thing in England whereby you can do a commercial to residential conversion without planning permission, etc.
Permitted development, is it?
Well,
that just seems so unfair, because like I'm always seeing these YouTube videos and podcasts of all these people doing these developments that just seems so much easier down there.
It does. It seems incredibly easier down there. However, I'm going to go back maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I did about a year, maybe a year and a half with Progressive Property. I was actually one of their mentors and trainers down there. And I was always a bit concerned, not just from the guys, but I was always a bit concerned about the whole philosophy that you could take a building, you could carve it up into, what was it? Was it a minimum 30 square meters so you could get a mortgage or something like that? And then you would create, 60 apartments in this wee industrial building in the middle of an industrial estate and call it residential. And knowing what we know about planning up here in Scotland, you think, well, sure, that's just going to lead to social, economic issues at some point down the line. That was always my concern. And that's starting to feed back to us now that there is potentially challenges with some of those developments down south. So in Scotland, for example, you can't do that. You're kind of bound by planning policy and you need to get your planning permission in place before that starts. And one of the big things I'm a big believer in is making sure that you don't have fear of planning. Now, I know we might have been a wee bit negative, but it's not to fear planning. Planning is maybe not as black and white as building control in terms of the tick box exercise, but planning is something that every developer in Scotland has to go through in order to get a development on the park. And it's something you just want to increase your skill set with. So how do you increase your skill set? Well, you've got to do more of it. So if you're niching, for example, in new built housing, you've got to keep going. You want to get 2 or 3 over your shoulder or over your head and make sure you know what you're doing. You want to work with architects and planning consultants, if needs be, who have the right skill set within that particular niche. And that builds up your confidence, your knowledge in the planning system, because after you've done 2 or 3, you will realise that there is intrinsic similarities between how planning is going to enforce policies, how you interpret policies, and then all of a sudden you can take that knowledge and potentially take that to the next development project, which might not be housing, it could be industrial. But then you're back to your pillars.
Quick question, right, with the planning, because obviously, like, I've looked at this myself and I've thought, after doing a few kind of residential, just flat developments, converting 1 bedroom to 2 bedroom and all that, I thought, I want to take it to the next stage now, maybe look at some land and stuff. And, I've often thought, right, okay, here's a plot of land in the auction, or I found one on Rightmove here. Say I went and bought that, right, and it didn't have any planning on it. And then I thought I could get I've done my kind of measurements. I've thought I could get 2 or 3 houses on there. What happens if I get a rejection? Then I've gone and bought that plot of land. Is that just me? Like, is that just a waste of time? Have I lost all that money? Like, what's the kind of processes and how do we mitigate that risk of purchasing the land and then not getting the planning?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the rejection from planning, to tackle the first point, is whatever the rejection is from planning needs to be looked at. On what grounds are they rejecting you? Are they rejecting it because the site's too dense, i.e. you can't get 3 houses on it, or they're rejecting it because it's too tall, they don't like the design? So it's very important to be specific about what is the rejection. But due diligence up front, looking at any site, is one of the most important things that you can do. I mean, we do it all the time for some of our, well, not all of our clients.
What are the sort of things you could do, just quickly?
Well, I'll quickly go out to the site. I'll look at the site. What's the level of the site? Is it a flat site? Is it a sloping site? What are the boundary conditions? Do we have listed stone walls round about it, or is it just fences? I'll look to see, is there any burns or rivers close to us? Have we got a flood risk issue? Is there any signs of knotweed? Have we got services close by? Some people will say that the site's serviced, which isn't a service site. It just means that the services are 100 yards down the road, and the person who's selling the site, the vendor's looking for you to actually bring in the services. That's not a fully serviced site. If you're buying that, you're looking for the services to be in the site. So
is there a check that I could do with the local authority where I could identify a bit of land and either phone them up or look on a website or something and see if I'm likely to get like planning for residential there, or?
Yeah, there's a thing called the local development plans. So you could look that up. So every council's got them. They're all online through the planning portals. You could look that up and you could see what land classification each bit of land is zoned as, whether it's industrial, residential, commercial, hotel, leisure, whatever it is. So you could look that up very quickly and ascertain, what the land use is. The big one that we see all the time is people who are selling plots of land which are in Greenbelt. Yeah, that's a big thing that you need to watch when you're doing a due diligence.
And would these be predominantly, you see these plots of land that are ridiculously cheap, especially on auction and stuff like that. Are these kind of maybe possible? Yeah. There's always a reason why it's so cheap, isn't it? And it's struggling to sell, and that's why it's in the auction. Probably these are going to be the potential ones that you're going to have difficulty with, I would imagine.
That's it. Let me think. The first four plots that I ever bought were at auction and failed through the auction, etc. The reason why they probably didn't sell was because the larger site was a ghost site. The main developer had went bust, and there was 4 bases in, so foundations and slabs were in. So that would potentially scare off quite a few, developers who are getting started. But the reality was that hindsight and knowledge, all we had to do was to prove that those slabs were of good sound condition, that the foundations were in as per the original build warrant, etc. So what did we do? We sent an engineer in to opened up some founds, etc. with the then landowner's permission. Everything was fine and we bought them, and that got us started on the first 4 sites. So I guess the thing is there are some sites which go to auction. Some of them have merit if you know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, if you can't do your proper due diligence, and that can sometimes just be going out to look at it. It doesn't necessarily mean, involving loads of professionals and solicitors and all that. Sometimes knowing what you're doing, going out and looking at it is enough just to tell you, that's where the problems are with this site.
And I'm assuming the first the checklist you would do would be just looking at how serviceable the site is. Can you get your gas, water, drainage, all that kind of stuff to it?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's one of the first things. But usually that's not the thing that scuppers a site, because you can always get, at a cost, you can usually always get services to a site. The cost is the issue. The Scottish water issue is certainly something that needs to be looked at for part of your due diligence. Let me think. Some of the stuff I've come across recently is next to a railway or next to a busy motorway. So you're into acoustic reports, thinking about how do you mitigate noise levels from the railway to make it a much more pleasant place to live. So these are all things. No one's making land right now that's virgin, all of it that's perfect. Every bit of land or site that you'll buy just now will come with some kind of issue. So the skill set in terms of the 5 pillars is to understand what that issue is. So
just while we're on this planning permission section, you hear a lot of course gurus out there, and these people that are teaching these courses saying one way of doing making loads of money out of property is just getting a plot of land and getting the planning permission on it and then selling it. This planning gain or whatever it's called. Is that a strategy that you see that can be quite, straightforward, or is that quite difficult to do that successfully?
It can be done. I've kind of done it myself to some extent. Never sold it at the end of the day, but it all depends what you buy the land for in the first place. And I guess that's the true skill of the negotiation of what you're buying the land for in the first place, because if you're going to go in there and buy a piece of land off someone because you don't know what you're doing and you offer, £80,000, you then go through the planning process, money with architects, reports, etc. And, you spend, for example, £10,000 and all of a sudden the land's only worth 100. You've really not bought it at the right price. Okay, you made £10,000, but you've not bought it at the right price. So I guess that all just comes back down to skill set. But yeah, there are people out there who would specialise in that. maybe at a larger scale, the opposite side. So maybe the companies who are going in and I've got one client developer who does that just now. He basically buys land on the peripheries of villages, but we're talking, fields. He is a farmer as well, so he might farm those fields for so long, and then every now and again he'll slip one through the local plan to try and sell that off as residential development. With a mix of commercial, roads, infrastructure, all that kind of stuff.
Is that once the development plan increases to have to include that land as part of their kind of residential development plan then?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, but these guys will actually lobby the plan department to get it included as well. So that's the kind of scale they're at. Now that can be very, very lucrative because you're buying at arable or farming land prices for your per acre, and then you're going through the process of converting that to residential, as opposed to buying a wee plot that's maybe £30,000 or £40,000.
What's the price difference between like land that's classed as kind of agricultural farming land versus land where you can put residential in?
Well, somebody told me recently, I was always under the impression that arable land was something like £5,000 an acre. Somebody told me recently that jumped to 20 grand an acre. So I probably need to do a wee bit of homework on that one just to be sure. But the end value of the residential land, I'm sure there's a rule of thumb somewhere, but you've got to work your way back from how many houses am I getting on it, what's my build cost, what's my abnormals. Some of the bigger developers will go in and say to a farmer or so right at the start, right, I'm going to give you £3 million for your land, subject to abnormals. But the farmer's thinking £3 million. And then they come back and say, we've looked into this. In order to get across that water, of course, we're going to have to build a bridge, and the bridge is 250 grand. So that's coming off your abnormals. And all of a sudden, this list gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and the farmers, well, there's your £1 million. Well, wait a minute. How do we get from 3 million to 1 million? So these are the games that go on. Wrongly.
We were touching on planning. Do you have a kind of rule of thumb costing for getting a site through planning? Like, what's the kind of costs involved with your professionals, your architect, your QSs, your going through the planning process?
Yeah, no, it really just depends on the development on the site. If it's 5 houses or 10 houses or 15, or if it's an industrial building of 10,000 square feet or 40,000 square feet, your fees go up accordingly.
With the development GDV, like.
Yeah, right. Your professional fees will go up. It could depend on the complexity of the building as well. So one of the fundamental things as you go through the 5 pillars is starting to understand. I mean, I've got a spreadsheet, just an Excel spreadsheet that I've developed over the last X number of years that suits me when it comes to pricing out any development I'm looking at for myself or for my clients. And I use that as a bit of a due diligence checklist as well when I'm actually starting to figure in the kind of key components and the key costs. But the kind of 5 pillars that we're talking about and we'll talk about, it's very important that you've worked out or get familiar with costing and appraising developments. That's probably the overriding pillar that we've never spoken about, is that's the fundamental important thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's difficult because a lot of that will just come with experience as well, isn't it? So
it comes with experience. It also comes with, there is a lot of property, I don't like to call them gurus, but property people out there who train. Some of the stuff that they're talking about is right. I've been to some of their courses. I don't mind spending money to go to some of their courses, even though
here's Scotland's top guru. Here's Scotland's top property guru right here.
Well, but it's one of those things I see and I hear people saying it's on Google, or you can find it here, you can find it there. But I'm also a big believer that I never learnt school from Google. I went to school. So there's a balance somewhere to be struck, and I think that people who are getting involved in property at the starting point need to pay for that knowledge, whether that's going to a course or whether that's sitting with an architect for 3 or 4 or 5 hours, or a QS or an engineer or whoever, to say, I'm going to pay for your time, give me some knowledge focused on about these specific questions. Yeah.
Bringing you back to your 5 pillars, because there was a lot to talk about the planning there, but moving on to number 3, the building warrant.
Yeah, so building control is one of the fundamental things as well. I guess in all my years, I can't say hand in heart that I've got one client who would turn around and say, I know everything about building control, or I know more about building control than you, Mr. Architect, or whatever. So the bottom line is not to try and become a building control expert. As architects, we get involved in building control, day in, day out, but it is a very subjective thing, no matter the fact that it's black and white. Which is to say, if I was putting a building warrant application in for a new built house, it's happened to us recently, and I put the same drawings in front of two different building control officers, they'll both come back with different comments and observations. It's just the nature of the beast. So building control, is very important that you understand when you're looking at architects' drawings, engineers' drawings, if you're a developer, that you've got a general understanding of what all of these things are and what they mean. What they mean for your build, what they mean for your costs. Yeah, so you need to try and pick up a kind of technical understanding of what these drawings and building control processes are, and also an understanding of the various types of reports and professionals who are required as part and parcel of the building control process. It's not a huge list, but you just need to understand that there's builds coming for that and there's reports required for that. And that,
like your structural engineer, your things like that.
Yeah, well, it could be something like it's a small one, but if you're doing a new build, commercial building, you'll have an SPEM calculation to do. So that's basically looking at the environmental performance of the building. Yeah. If you're doing a new build house, the contemporary of that is the SAP calculation. So, there's wee costs, and that basically generates a pass or a fail. The building passes the environmental criterion standards, or it doesn't. And then you've got to work with your architect to tweak that. And that can come down to something fundamental, like your architect coming back to you and saying, what boiler do you want to use? And I go, well, I don't know about boilers yet. I'm not at that stage. I've even got a building warrant. Yeah, but building control are now forcing us down these routes of having all this information up front. Yeah.
And you've also got all the EPC regulations now as well, all that kind of energy performance compliance too.
Well, that's covered in the SAP calculation. Yeah, so from the SAP calculation, it will generate a certificate which looks a bit like it is your EPC eventually. Yeah, so that's the kind of rainbow coloured branded performance of the building. Yeah.
And I'm looking at your pillar number 4, which is labelled build it. This seems to me as this process just gets more and more painful as it goes on. I mean, now you're dealing with builders. You've had to deal with the council, which has been painful enough. So we're on to this build stage now. Build
it is probably the fun bit for most clients, because that's the bit they want to get to. Yeah, that's the bit they want to get to, and that's fine. But there's some cautionary notes in there, and one of the biggest cautionary notes is just making sure you've got a proper contract in place with your contractor. Yeah. So on some of the smaller projects, your contractor could come along and say, there's an A4 bit of paper, or a couple of A4 bits of paper that says, I'm going to build this for £150,000, whatever it is. Yeah. That's not quite enough. It's maybe all right when you get started, but it's not enough should any difficulties arise during the course of the build. And by difficulties, I don't mean that you've necessarily thrown out your builder. I mean things like, what happens if there's an anticipated additional cost? How do you know it's included? How do you know it's not included? So all that stuff is about, setting up a proper contract with proper contract documents before you get started. Yeah.
Are these contracts basically come off the back of the building warrant, because the building warrant will have as much detail as you can on the build and the specification of the build?
Yeah. So architects work in, a specific way. So you'll have a set of build warrant drawings, and in that package there'll be just enough information to get you through the building control process. But we also have a thing called production information, where we can take those drawings and throw a lot more information at it. Things like window schedules, door schedules, finishes, specific manufacturers or specific components in the building. We could be setting out electrical sockets, all the boring stuff. Actually, I don't do it a lot because I find it particularly boring. But
you need a detail to price up, I'm assuming, or get an accurate pricing at the building at stage.
So the more information you put on the drawings to accurately get you on site, the more qualified your cost will be before you get started.
Would you recommend going down the route of getting a main contractor rather than organising all the individual trades themselves? Because like my sister did a self-build a couple of years ago, and she got all individual trades, and like I saw her go through an enormous amount of stress, and I thought, I wonder if that would be wonder if it would have gone so much smoother with getting a main contractor?
Yeah, it's like everyone else. It's how you getting the right main contractor. That's the fundamental thing. So it's back to pillar one and getting the right power team, because your main contractor could form part of that power team. It might be that if you've worked with this contractor once or twice before, that you're bringing them right in at the start of the project to start discussing the design, the build, what construction methods, etc. So I've, over the last 4 or 5 years, built 60 odd houses myself for one of my business partners. So in theory, I am a contractor managing subcontractors and stuff, and I hate it. Because that's not how I'm used to working. As an architect, I'm used to turning up on site, having a main contractor in place, and being able to direct all of the subbies, etc., through the main contractor. One point of contact. I need this done for next week.
I'm assuming there's a massive kind of inflated cost on having a main contractor versus project managing the development and splitting the packages down into smaller packages. I'm assuming the main contractor's going to have a premium. Do you know what the premium would be, or?
Yeah, it's kind of between 10 to 12%, depending on the project and the scale and the job. Yeah.
So it could be worth paying that extra 15, 20 grand on a smaller development to have the less hassle to deal them every single trade, including up the site behind them.
Personally, and that's my personal opinion, I would pay that all day long.
Yeah. Otherwise, you risk you have the risk of having a mental breakdown, I think.
But I suppose it all comes back to your due diligence. If you've not got the skill set to find, like the point you touched on before about finding the site and buying the site at the right price. If you don't buy the site at the right price, you're going to have to be the one that skimps and saves and pulls in, sourcing, procuring the materials and managing every single contractor as well to bring the cost back down. But if you've got the knowledge up front, you can kind of factor the higher cost into the full development of saying, well, there's a main contractor's price. It's going to be X amount of square meterage, but I've bought the site right in the first place, that my profit margin still stands.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've got clients who do it one way or the other. I don't. You're not wrong if you want to have a go at it yourself, but you just need to be mindful of, if you've got a full-time job, for example, and you think you're going to roll up for 1 hour a couple of times a week and manage even a self-built house, that's just not going to work. It's not going to work.
The time, the experience and the time that you've been involved in this, Kenneth, you've obviously seen people, probably make, you probably see the same mistakes getting made again and again. Where's the kind of in the process? Where's the biggest mistakes that people make?
Oh gosh.
Is there any one that sort of keeps happening with people where you just think, I told you so, or I knew this was going to happen, or is it kind of different every time? The one that's sitting in my head just now that you've asked the question is the one where they think, well, I'm gonna rely on my mate or a family member who's a joiner, an electrician or what have you, and they'll do it for me at cost, kind of thing, And it just never works, because your brother who's an electrician has been out all week doing a full shift. He comes in at Friday night. He's got kids, he's got a wife or whatever. The last thing his missus is going to let him do is run out on a Saturday and Sunday and do a couple of shifts on your house. Yeah. So in the past, I would say that, I mean, I've had not been involved in, but heard of clients of mine who've done this, and the family squabbles that's come out of it has just been horrendous. Families splitting up and all this kind of stuff. So I guess that's the biggest thing I would say, that is if you're going to go down the kind of management route where you're going to self-manage your own build or your own project, I would say don't rely on family. In fact, give it a wide berth, families and friends, give it a wide berth, Get people in that that are maybe recommended, but you don't necessarily know. You don't have a personal relationship with them, because then if things do go a wee bit awry, you can obviously, snap the whip a wee bit bigger. Absolutely, 100% agree with that. It's the same with me managing lettings. It's like you get a landlord will say, "Oh, I've got a friend or my cousin or my uncle or something like that," and then, like you say, they've never got the time to do it. It drags on and on and on, and then when it goes wrong, like you say, when it goes wrong, there's an awkwardness there because they're scared to upset the relationship, so they kind of just put up with it. I said
to people, when you're starting out, when you do your first property project, you can get that because people will kind of help you a little bit, because this is your first project. If you start putting in planning permission to build 5 houses or flipping and making flipping a house and making 60, 70 grand profit. They're not doing it for you for free. And then you're the one that they've got a relationship with that are comfortable letting down, whereas they're not comfortable letting down a customer that's paying a premium, or they don't know, or they don't want their reputation getting ruined. Whereas you're, like you say, you're their brother, their uncle. I can't make it this weekend. I can't make it this night. She's giving me grief. So it just causes none but grief. I'd completely agree with that as well.
The other thing, Nick, that's just coming to mind there is it comes back to costings as well. So a lot of the kind of novice developers, what they'll do is they'll think, right, my house, when I finish it, is going to be worth 250 grand or whatever. Yeah, I'm going to spend, let's say, I don't know, 80 grand on the plot. Not that I'm saying that's the right figure for a 250 grand house, but they've tied in 80 grand. So all of a sudden they're thinking, right, I spent my life savings, 80 grand to get this site, and I'm ready to get started. And then there goes Chapman Doors for architects, engineers, and blah, 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 blah. Now you're 20 to 30 grand to get you through the planning and the building control process now with all these different reports, even for a one-off house. So they've usually not got the 20 or 30 grand because they've spent everything up front on buying the land, paid too much for it essentially. So that's one of the other big things I would say, is that people in development typically don't work through or do enough due diligence on those additional costs. They've got to know the upfront costs, the pre-start spend. They don't have don't spend enough time working out what that is.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to the last one. It's number 5, post-completion.
Yeah, post-completion. So I think one of the big things that I talk about in post-completion is usually what will happen is the house is sold, or the houses, the development's sold, and everybody thinks, well, that's it, we're kind of done and dusted, but that's never usually the case. There's a whole series of potentially, like, for example, warranties that's associated with the development that you just need to make sure that any liabilities, if you're doing it for a limited company, that you're continuing those liabilities. The big thing, of course, is if you're doing this as a developer, you might have set up an SPV and you've then got to shut that company as well. So there's certain processes and procedures to do that, to get your money then out tax efficiently. So I guess that's why that pillar's in there, because it's just an aid memoir. And I go into a lot more detail, and some of the kind of the online courses and what have you that I run. But it's just to make people aware that you're not necessarily finished as soon as you've got the money in the bank. There's other stuff that's got to happen after that development.
So see if you do like like the national, is it NHBC with the National Home Builder? Is it like a premium that? I think that's an insurance product that you put in place. Is it like a 10-year warranty or something that the new build that the person gets buying the house gets from you? So yeah, if you put that in a limited company that you've set up to do the development, then you close the limited company down. How does that work for the insurance policy being valid then?
Well, the policy is still valid, but the one I'm thinking of just now was Premier Guarantee. So Premier Guarantee, when I did it with Premier Guarantee, they had an escrow account. So as well as paying for the warranties, you had to pay them over and above that to set an escrow account. And it's quite a considerable, it's tens of thousands of pounds.
Was it?
And you've got to pay them every year to renew. I think it's 500 or 600 quid. You have to pay them every year to keep the license going. Yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think that's 3 years since we finished our last house through that Premier Guarantee, and that's the escrow account just coming up for grabbing. Yeah. Now,
so if they don't claim any of the warranties, you get the money back. Then is that?
So nobody claims on a warranty, we get the money back. Yeah. So all I'm trying to say is there's wee things depending on warranties, maybe just one of the things, but there's things you've got to be mindful of if you want to get all of that money out of the development, that you don't just go, right, well, that's the development done, lock the company up. You've also potentially got a 12-month snagging period as well, defects period, So you can't just go sell a house and then shut the company down, and Mr. Brown comes along in week 4 and says, there's my defects list, and go, well, shut my company. You can't do that. So there's certain things that, in terms of post-completion, that you need to look at, review. Your design team could be preparing, depending on the type of development, things like maintenance plans. You might as the client, let me think, big industrial building. You've maybe got it let out, but you've got certain maintenance responsibilities and liabilities as the client to make sure things are happening in the building.
I think you did touch on probably the biggest thing there was a tax implication, because people kind of hear, oh, we'll just set up an SPV to do this development and we'll close it. But if you've made a couple $100,000 and you close that company and the money's coming into you personally, you're just going to get a massive tax bill. Like you're going to be earning money elsewhere. So you're pretty much going to be at the tipping point of, if you're not already a higher rate taxpayer, there's your chunk of that SPV profits, then it's probably so important to get that right advice up front on how you kind of structure that.
Yeah, so that would go back to pillar one in terms of who's in your power team, stroke design team, would be a good accountant, because even if you were just doing a one-off house, making £50,000 profit, that's enough to kick most people with a full-time job into the higher tax bracket. So getting all that advice up front and understanding that it's a circle, it completes, there's no, but in years gone by, I've been involved with clients and developers who they tended to not cut corners, but miss things out. Yeah. But I keep telling everyone now it's a full circle, planning, building control, building things on site, regulations, SEPA, Scottish Water, the processes, procedures that all of these organisations have in place are so watertight now that eventually, the thing that you've not done is going to catch up with you. And you just need to tick all the boxes.
Cool. I think that we should have, that's the 5 pillars completed, but I think there was a bit right at the start, which I'm quite interested in. If I wanted to actually get started and find a bit of land to get going on a new build, finding the actual land, have you got any tips where to look for that? Is there any good websites or anything like that where you could find? Or
I think websites is it. Everybody. I mean, I still look at Rightmove every night just to see what's coming on, just out of curiosity. I tend not to look at auction sites. Maybe I should, but for the reason we've just started about, I tend not to look at them. My big thing is if you've got a specific area in mind, is actually try and phone up a few local architects, because architects have always got sites that they've worked on for clients that are on the shelf. The client's not done it for whatever reason. And some sites don't progress, not because it's a bad site, just because the owners had some difficulties, family issues, etc. And those issues can be enough just for them to turn and say, you know what, I'm not going to build it, I'm just going to sell it. And I can't be bothered with the hassle or whatever. So I would say if you're really seriously looking at finding bit of land or a development, what have you, reach out to the local architects in the area where you're looking for and just have a chat with them and see what they've got on their books, because you'll probably pick something up.
And I'm assuming they'll be motivated to help you as well, because if they're helping you source that land, they'll probably get appointed as the architect to continue on with the site.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. Because I was looking at a bit of land not far from me, and I phoned up the architect who put it through planning and what have you. And as soon as he found it was an architect, he decided he wasn't going to speak to me anymore, because he knew that I would take the project forward. So you're right. I'm motivated by if we've done some work on, say, getting planning permission, if there's a chance of getting the building warrant fee out of it, etc., then we'll try and help push that land on. Yeah.
There is quite a lot of information available, like you say, on the public planning portals and that as well, isn't it? It's quite interesting watching how things progress. And I always look in the local press as well to see like what other developers are up to. So, like, for example, like in Glasgow, it's like the Evening Times, so you can see that, they're building so many houses there. And then that gives you an idea, where things are happening and the planning's getting granted in these areas. So it gives you a wee idea of what's possible.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's loads going on. If you're of a mind to actually sit and go through the planning portal, then you can go through that. You can pick some stuff up. Look, the thing is, if you're looking for something off market, you've got to spend some time and effort to go and find it. If you want something to land on your doorstep, then maybe Rightmove's the right place for you. But few and far between. So it just depends how much work you're prepared to do to actually, go through all these different portals and find something that might suit your criteria.
The temptation would be as a beginner to get something that's already had the planning approved, wouldn't it? But quite often I would imagine that already the margins have been squeezed right out by that point.
Yeah, I hear a lot of people. Well, I was actually playing golf yesterday with someone. He does a bit of sourcing, what have you, and he was telling me he's trying to get into development himself. and he was telling me that he was looking at a plot of ground. The architect had put a house in. It was something like, let me think, 200 square metre house plus a 20 square metre garage, or whatever it was, and the end value was 250 grand. And the guy was looking for 100 grand for the site, you know. Now, the architect had maxed out the size of the house on the site, right? You couldn't get a bigger house on it. It was maxed out. But the numbers don't work, and the architect should have understood that the numbers don't work, because a 220 square metre house, you know, is going to cost you, you know, let's say raw bill costs £1,000 a square metre. You know, there's 200 grand. You know, 100 grand for the land, you're sitting at 300 grand, and the maximum GDV in the house is 250. Just doesn't work. So
I imagine that would be the build cost quite conservative there as well, with the way materials have gone the last.
Yeah. Well, one of the interesting things I see, and I probably I don't comment a lot, Nick and Stephen, but I'm probably in a lot of the Facebook groups and what have you that you guys, you know, are in. And the question that I hate all the time is, what's my square metre rate cost for a house and so and so? Or what's my square metre rate? Said, you know what? The answer is, it depends what you want to include in the square metre rate.
If you're doing it up to the standards that Stephen does them, especially some of his flips,
I'm glad you touched on that, Kenneth, because I always look at the same thing. You look at sites and you kind of look at a rough kind of build cost, and you just go, that doesn't work. That's miles out. They're doing a profit margin, actually losing money. And it kind of. And I always think, am I doing something wrong on my due diligence process? But I think you hit the nail on the head. It's just it's buying the site right. If you're looking on the market for this site and paying the market what they're kind of dictating as the market value, you're already paying too much for it because of the build cost and the GDV. So it's probably sourcing the land and buying the land right in the first place.
Yeah. Or the flip side of that is you might potentially buy a bit of land and have paid too much for it relative to the development that's got planning approval. Or can you do something with that approval to increase the value of the land? You know, can you put another story in the building? Can you do something that's going to make that a viable project? You know, so.
Well, your example, maybe that big house. The first thing I kind of thought of there was, do you get two sets of semis in it with no big garage, and you've got a semi worth 150 grand each? There's 600 grand. The site could be the GDV. The site could be.
Yeah, that's it. Absolutely. I think that's one of the fundamental skills of a developer. Through time, once you've got experience, is that you can look at a bit of land and say, you know what, that deal, I've done this for 20 odd years. I can walk on a bit of land now and go, within 5-10 minutes ago, there's the challenges with that bit of land, and here's the questions you need to go and answer before we go any further forward. And that's just through experience. You know, that's architectural training, having done it a long enough time. But I think when you're an experienced developer, and I have worked with them, you know, they've got that same skill set. They'll walk on a bit of land and say, look, those two houses don't work there. But I know if I change those two houses to smaller houses, I can turn a profit. Because putting the biggest house on a plot isn't necessarily the way to secure the profit. You know?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, that's brilliant. And from a personal point of view, where are you going to focus your attention on for the next kind of year or two?
To be honest with you, some of you will know my wife's got a service accommodation business. So the whole thing of, you know, recurring income is really appealing to me just now. You know.
So big shout out to Sandra Martin, who we should get on the podcast. Actually, it's gonna see if she'll come on. We'll reach out to her, message her ourselves.
I'll maybe have a word with her later. But no, that's the big thing for Sandra and I. I mean, we've built houses. Well, you know, the big thing of building houses is you. It's okay saying you build a house and you make money, you give it away, but I'm 47 now. I just done 47 the weekend there, and the big thing in my head is just trying to find a way now of having that recurring income. You know, that if you decide you want to get up on a Wednesday or a Thursday and say, you know what, I'm not going into the office, I'm going to play golf. You've got that recurring income. So the big focus for Sandra and I over the next 2 or 3 years is to do that. You know, so we're looking to grow our own property portfolio now. We've got some property, but we want to grow that. Get our own offices because we're spending a fortune on rents every single year, etc., and just grow our net worth that way.
It's excellent, though. It's good to have that concept because people do see the big shiny penny object as going for, I'm going to build a handful of houses and make a couple hundred grand profit, but like you say, that couple £100,000 profit gets put right back in the next site or the next development, and you're kind of not materialising that, whereas they're building that income up where you can kind of get that bit of freedom through a portfolio. But I definitely believe there's a way trying to kind of do both, isn't there?
Yeah, I think most of us don't need a huge income to have a good quality of life. You know, years and years ago, I was involved in a network marketing company, and they used to say that if you can make £10,000 clear a month, that you'd be on your path to becoming a millionaire. Now, £10,000 a month is a lot of money to some people. I do understand that, but it's not a lot of money a month. You know, so what can you do in your business with a property development work to get £10,000 a month net profit? So, you know, service accommodation, for example, you know, we can regularly get 1,500 quid or so. And Sandra paid me 1,500 quid there last week for a service accommodation that I actually own. And I think, you know, you actually don't need a lot of those. You know, now if that was buy-to-lets, you'd probably need 4 for every one service accommodation or so. So it's just starting to think right, as I'm pushing 50, how do I create some time for me now? You know, I've done the whole architecture thing, and I'll still do it. It's just, how do you get a recurring income? You don't need that much money. I don't need the Lamborghinis and Ferraris and all that kind of stuff. I just want time with my family, you know, go play golf and have some fun. You know,
absolutely.
Nice, excellent. We'll end on that note. Is there any where that we can link on the show notes to yourself for any of the courses that you run, or?
I'll probably message in that one actually. Yeah, we've got some online courses. You can go to blockarchitects.co.uk and you can see some of the free online courses there. And essentially, it's just for people who want to get started in property development. Everything we've just spoke about, and it's free.
Excellent. I'll link these in the show notes. Cheers very much, Kenneth, for joining us.
Sure, fantastic.
Really appreciate your time. Thanks again for being on the show.
No bother. Thanks for the invite. Appreciate it, guys.
So, guys, I hope you enjoyed that interview. I know myself and Nick certainly did. It was nice to kind of have a couple of podcast guests recently where it's been focused on new build developments. We had Eddie from Invertay Homes on a couple of weeks ago, so it was nice to kind of break this down into the simpler stages and getting started in property development. So, hope you guys found that useful.
Great, guys. As always, if you've got any suggestions for any future podcasts or content, then just drop us a wee note. Please follow us on social media, on Instagram, get on our Facebook group, give us a wee shout out over there, and we'll put your stories out to our followers as well. And also our property networking events, which are really good fun, are the first Wednesday of every month in Aberdeen, Dundee, Edinburgh and Glasgow. You'll find the tickets for £20 on the Eventbrite website. Just type in Scottish Property Podcast and they'll all pop up. And we hope to see you at one of them, and we'll speak to you again soon on the podcast.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Bye for now.